What could have led to this horrific crime in Mexico? A crime that the entire family members of the victim could not recover from until this day. How evil can people be? Does she deserve to die in such an unimaginable way? This crime will keep you on your toes when you finish watching. Make sure you watch to the end. On February 7, 2023, a tragic discovery was made near Real de Catorce, San Luis Potosí, Mexico. A passerby, while walking in the area, noticed a torn garbage bag from which skeletal remains were visible. Upon closer inspection, it became clear that the remains were the upper torso of a woman. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, especially when authorities immediately recognized the victim. The woman was Kieri Valencia, a 24-year-old from Guadalajara, Jalisco, who had traveled to Huejijilla el Alto to celebrate her birthday. It would be the last time anyone saw or heard from her. Her phone, found covered in blood, along with some of her belongings, were discovered in the nearby forest. But there were no signs of her. Kieri had vanished without a trace, and the search for answers began. Kieri was born to Hikuri Valencia and Kieri Carrillo, the eldest of 3 children. Life was not easy for her, as her parents separated when she was young. Her father, Hikuri, remarried Nayeli, who took on the challenge of helping to raise the 3 teenagers. Despite the challenges, Kieri remained close to her family and was known for her sweet, kind, and radiant personality. She was often described as a striking beauty, with an energy that lit up any room she entered. Her looks were not just about appearance. They were part of her larger vision for her life. From a young age, Kieri understood the power of her beauty and what it could offer in terms of opportunities. She dreamt of a life in the limelight, and she worked hard to maintain her physical appearance to fit her aspirations. Long hair, flawless skin, and a bright, infectious smile were her trademarks. Though her modeling dreams didn't materialize as she hoped, she never gave up on them. She continued to strive toward her goals, determined that one day she would live the life she had always envisioned. Kieri's story is one of resilience, hope, and the pursuit of a better future. But tragically, her life was cut short in a senseless act of violence. The community grieves, but we will not allow her memory to fade. Her life, her dreams, and the justice she deserves will continue to drive us until the responsible party is found. Kieri was more than a victim. She was a beloved daughter, sister, and friend. And we will not rest until her story is heard and justice is served. The Valencias had always lived a quiet, comfortable life in Guadalajara, Jalisco. Kieri, at 24, was a young woman full of energy and ambition. Recently, she had celebrated her birthday, but unlike most people who are content with a single day of festivities, Kieri wanted more. She craved adventure, something to make her feel truly alive. So, she decided to treat herself to an exclusive trip to Huejijilla el Alto, a place she'd long dreamed of visiting. Kieri poured her heart into preparing for the journey, carefully selecting outfits, accessories, and a collection of beautiful things to accompany her. She even packed work materials, just in case she found herself staying longer than planned. The excitement was palpable, and her plans for the trip were as grand as they were detailed. However, little did she know, this journey would lead to an unimaginable turn of events. Her time in Huejijilla el Alto was supposed to be the perfect escape, an opportunity to take a break from the daily grind and indulge in something new. Kieri made sure to share every moment of her travels with her family and friends, updating them on both the highs and the lows of her experience. She never missed a chance to post pictures and stories on social media, keeping everyone in the loop about the new places she was exploring. But then, on April 13, 2022, everything stopped. Kieri, who had always been so consistent in updating her loved ones, suddenly went silent. No more messages, no more calls, and most shockingly, no more updates on social media. Her father, Hikuri, who was already anxious by nature, became immediately worried. Kieri was never one to go long without checking in, especially with him. The silence was unlike her. 2 days passed, and the concern turned to panic. The Valencias, unsure of what had happened, hired a private investigator. The investigator quickly traced Kieri's last known location to a park called Chapultepec, a sprawling, dense forest area located in Huejijilla el Alto. But when they located her phone, their worst fears began to take shape. The phone, covered in blood, was found on the roadside near Chapultepec Park. It was a terrifying sign that something had gone terribly wrong. The Valencias were horrified. They knew they had to act fast. Hikuri immediately boarded a flight to Huejuquilla El Alto, determined to find his daughter and bring her home. When he arrived, his first stop was the local police department. Hikuri was furious. The police had been slow to take the case seriously, dismissing it at first as just another missing person report. But Hikuri's frustration boiled over as he confronted them, accusing them of not caring enough because Kiyuri was a young woman of a different skin color. The police, realizing the gravity of the situation, finally took swift action, though it was clear that much time had already been wasted. Their first course of action was to head to Chapultepec Park, where Kiri's phone had been discovered, but the search was far from straightforward. Chapultepec Park was a vast, untamed forest area, with overgrown trees and winding trails. The terrain was treacherous, with some paths impassable and others leading in different directions, making it easy to get lost. The police had their work cut out for them, and as they navigated the dense foliage, it quickly became clear that the situation was much more complex than anyone had anticipated. Hikuri refused to give up, his resolve only hardening with each passing moment. As he pushed forward, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The forest felt eerily silent, as if it too was hiding the truth. But Hikuri was determined, and he wouldn't rest until he had answers that would finally bring his daughter back home, or at least bring justice to what had happened to her. The search for Kiyuri was filled with uncertainty, confusion, and frustration. It wasn't clear whether her phone had been thrown from a moving car or if something else had happened, especially since it was found at the edge of the road. To make matters worse, the police decided to keep the investigation low profile, thinking the perpetrator might be a local resident who could interfere with their work. This made the whole situation feel even more complicated. The number of officers sent to search Chapultepec was too small for such a vast area, and the atmosphere was one of quiet defeat. Many of the officers didn't expect to find anything, though they all hoped they'd be proven wrong. Unfortunately, their pessimism turned out to be justified. The search was ultimately fruitless, and the Valencias were left feeling the sting of defeat. But despite the setback, they refused to give up. Hikuri, Kiyuri's father, was determined to find his daughter no matter what. Refusing to let his hope fade, Hikuri took matters into his own hands. He started posting flyers all over the area, spreading Kiyuri's picture and description far and wide. He described her as a Latina girl with dark skin, brown eyes, standing 5 inches 5 tall and weighing 68 kgs. She had a tattoo of butterflies and roses on her right shoulder, a detail that could help someone recognize her. The community began to take notice, and the flyers sparked a renewed sense of vigilance in the locals. It wasn't long before small search groups were organized, and soon, the whole community, including the FBI, was combing through the area in hopes of finding any trace of Kiyuri. Malia Sandoval, a social activist and the new leader of the new Black Panther Nation, brought a crucial issue to the public's attention. She pointed out that in the past 5 months, 4 other dark-skinned girls had gone missing under similar circumstances. Girls who had been attempting to meet people for money, only to disappear and end up dead. What made these disappearances even more tragic was that the authorities had delayed their investigations, and the cases often slipped under the radar. Her speech on April 20th caught the public's attention, and as a result, the police were forced to increase their efforts. Despite these intensified search efforts, the only new clue that surfaced was Kiyuri's purse. The detectives, now working with the information they had, started piecing together a timeline of Kiyuri's movements. They began by speaking to her family and friends, focusing on those she kept in regular contact with. Through this process, they learned something crucial. Kiyuri had applied for a job as an adult entertainer at a club called Cover Girls located in the northwest part of Huejuquilla El Alto. Unfortunately, her application was rejected, but what followed was even more troubling. After leaving the club, she had taken a taxi, and that was the last anyone had heard from her. This new lead pointed to the club as a potential key to understanding what had happened to Kiyuri. Both the Valencias and local activists were now convinced that the club knew more than they were letting on. It seemed too coincidental that Kieri had gone missing right after her visit, and the club's possible involvement in her disappearance weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Still, Hikuri held on to a glimmer of hope. He couldn't bring himself to believe that his daughter was gone for good. He imagined that Kiri had found herself in some kind of tough situation, something that had spiraled out of control, but he believed she was still out there, somewhere. His determination was constant. He knew he had to keep searching, keep fighting, no matter the cost. To amplify the search, the detective set up a special program where Hikuri could go live, pleading for any information and sharing his family's deep longing to bring Hikuri home. They hoped that hearing the pain in his voice would prompt someone to come forward with the information they needed. Hikuri's story was heartbreaking, but filled with a father's love and unyielding resolve. And despite the odds, he would keep searching, believing that someday, somehow, he would find Kiuri again, and hoped that somewhere out there, in the world beyond her captivity, there might be a TV or radio bro window broadcast that would remind her she wasn't forgotten, something to reassure her that someone, anyone, was still looking for her. I arrived here in Huejuquilla El Alto on April 16, 2022, Hikuri began, his voice filled with a quiet frustration. And the first thing I did was reach out to the local police, trying to gather any information on my daughter's disappearance. I didn't want to waste any time, but it took 5 days before the Huejuquilla El Alto Police Department even began to look into it. I couldn't understand why it was taking so long. The Valencia family had become increasingly doubtful of the police's efforts. With each passing day, it seemed less likely that the authorities were making any real progress on their own. Instead, all the significant breakthroughs had come from outside sources, things they were supposed to be investigating. Kiri's phone had been found by a private detective. Her purse had been discovered by a group of local volunteers. And even as they continued searching for answers, it wasn't the police who spoke to the public, but Kiri's father, Hikuri. He had taken on the role of advocate, spokesperson, and investigator all at once. Desperate to keep the momentum of the search alive, a small but determined group of friends and well-wishers gathered near an administrative building in Huejuquilla El Alto, hoping to catch the attention of the mayor and encourage him to act. Hikuri understood he was in a city that wasn't his own, and that any real progress in finding Kieri would depend on the cooperation of the locals. He couldn't just expect the police to do it all, especially when there were glaring gaps in their investigation. The police, it seemed, had access to surveillance footage that Hikuri was certain could offer valuable clues. But for reasons he couldn't explain, they weren't sharing it with him. It felt like the investigation had been stalled by something far deeper than simple oversight. Despite the seeming lack of progress, the gathering did attract some attention, including that of Congresswoman Jean-Marie Batista. She was not a woman to shy away from a challenge, and she vowed to push the police into taking the case more seriously. She even promised to track down any available surveillance footage, holding the authorities accountable for what seemed like neglect. Hikuri naturally was eager to see the footage. Maybe it would give him some insight, some clue to piece together what had happened to his daughter. But as he soon learned, things weren't so straightforward. When the club where Kieri had visited was first contacted, the management denied any knowledge of her presence. They claimed there were no records of her coming to inquire about a job. But after further persuasion from the detectives, the club finally relented and offered the investigators access to their internal surveillance footage. The footage was somewhat revealing, though not as much as Hikuri had hoped. It showed Kieti entering the club, inquiring about a potential job, but shortly after, she was turned away. There was no sign of trouble, no obvious conflict, just a brief interaction before she left and walked out the door. She called a taxi, but there was a delay, and soon after, an unknown man approached her with an offer for a ride. Hesitant at first, Kieri eventually accepted. This man dropped her off at the Huejuquilla El Alto Medical Center Hotel, where Kieri was staying. It was a critical moment. It was now clear she had made it back to the hotel, but after that her trail went cold again. No one knew where she had gone or who she had been with after that night. Continue watching because this is the most interesting part of the story. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe now, like and share your thoughts in the comment section. Prior to this, Kieri had posted an ad on an online escort service, She'd started receiving messages, but one stood out, a response from a 28-year-old man named William Smith, who was based in both Mexico and the US. They'd exchanged a few messages, and soon, an intimate meeting was set for $500. After that exchange, Kieri disappeared without a trace. It was as though she had vanished from the face of the earth. The investigators were left with nothing but fragments of information, none of which seemed to lead to any clear answers. Each clue only seemed to bring up more questions, and with each dead end, the hope of finding Kieri seemed to slip further away. Ikuri couldn't help but feel the weight of the uncertainty. What had happened to his daughter? Had she been lured into something dangerous, or was she caught up in something far bigger than anyone had realized? He could only hope that one day the pieces would fall into place, and Kieri would be found. It became painfully clear why the police department had initially failed to take this case seriously. The woman in question, who had agreed to meet a man in exchange for money, seemed insignificant in their eyes. They didn't consider her as valuable, which likely contributed to the delayed investigation. But as the details unfolded, it was obvious there was more to the story. The police eventually uncovered that William had arranged for an Uber driver to pick her up from her location. The driver took her to a specific address, 3200 block of Avenida de los Insurgentes Sur, 2100 Colonia Tlalpan, 1400 Ciudad de Mexico, CDMX, where William had lived from 2017 to 2020. The reason William chose to have her dropped off at his former residence rather than his current apartment remains unclear. However, what happened next gave the police even more cause for suspicion. Once the woman arrived at the old apartment, William himself picked her up and drove her to his new place on South Huejoquilla El Alto Avenue. An hour later, surveillance footage showed William's car leaving his property, almost perfectly aligning with the time Kieri's phone pinged a cell tower near Chapultepec Park. It was as though William had carefully orchestrated the timeline, and police believed that he had disposed of the girl's body at his home, likely attempting to destroy her phone as well. The scene hinted that Kieri had fought back, as there was evidence of resistance. She had been injured in a struggle, and the bandages found suggested she had tried to defend herself. This only added to the mounting evidence against William. The investigation took a startling turn on April 16th, when surveillance captured William at a store buying several suspicious items: garbage bags, gloves, a flashlight, a shovel, an electric kitchen saw, and a towel. The next day, April 17th, William was seen at a clinic seeking treatment for a cut he had sustained, a possible injury from his grisly actions. It was becoming increasingly clear that William hadn't immediately disposed of Kieri's body. Rather, he had taken his time, dismembering it for easier transport. When it came to light that William was the one who had arranged the taxi for her, he quickly became the primary suspect. But it wasn't just the actions that raised eyebrows. It was what was found on his phone that truly shocked the investigators. Upon examining his phone's search history, the police were stunned by what they discovered. The history revealed disturbing queries such as, how to become a serial killer, can bleach destroy DNA, the most wooded part of Houston, how to get away with murder, and places to live for as low as $1,000. These searches indicated that William had likely premeditated the murder, carefully planning the steps he would take to cover his tracks. Despite the mounting evidence, the case took another unexpected twist. On May 13, 2022, the police conducted a routine traffic stop and stumbled upon William Smith. He was immediately arrested and interrogated, but not for the murder. Instead, it was for road charges, though the authorities found a troubling assortment of items in his possession: latex gloves, a shovel, dried bloodstains, and a pistol. Still, despite this incriminating evidence, William was surprisingly released soon after. The police claimed they didn't have enough solid evidence to hold him longer. Undeterred, the police seized his mobile phone and obtained a search warrant for his home, hoping to uncover more clues. But by the time they took these steps, William had vanished without a trace, slipping into the shadows. This turn of events left the police in a frustrating position. While they had a wealth of circumstantial evidence, William's sudden disappearance made it difficult to finalize the investigation. The case once thought to be straightforward, had turned into a tense, drawn-out mystery, and while William may have eluded capture for now, the investigators remained determined, knowing the truth was just within reach. The police had started investigating William, Chieri's boyfriend, after the mysterious disappearance of the young woman. What they uncovered in their search would shatter any hopes of a simple resolution to this case. When the officers searched William's apartment and phone, they stumbled upon a terrifying discovery. In the bedroom, there was a splatter of blood that, when analyzed, was confirmed to belong to Chieri. The amount found on the floor strongly suggested that it was highly unlikely she could have survived such an ordeal. Yet, there was more to the story. As investigators combed through William's phone, they found unsettling pictures of several deceased women, one of whom had been dismembered. Though there was no direct evidence linking these images to Chieri, investigators couldn't help but connect the dots. The discovery of additional clues in the Chapultepec forest would only fuel the fear that Chieri might have been one of his victims. But this wasn't the first time William had been involved in disturbing incidents. Authorities uncovered a prior case where William had been accused of attempting to assault a woman in his car. Thankfully, she had managed to escape. Despite the harrowing ordeal, the woman later recanted her statement, claiming she didn't want to pursue charges. The reason behind her sudden change of heart remained a mystery. What was clear, though, was that William had a troubling history of targeting women, and the more investigators dug into his past, the more they began to suspect him in Chieri's case. Unfortunately, by the time they had gathered all this evidence, William had vanished. Detectives couldn't help but feel guilty, thinking that if they had been more patient with him when he was in custody, they could have prevented the tragic events from unfolding further. For the Valencia family, every revelation brought both hope and heartbreak. With the case progressing, it became increasingly clear that they would never see their beloved Chieri again. They clung to the hope that, at the very least, they would find her body and give her the proper burial she deserved. A reward of $5,000 was offered to anyone who could provide information leading to William's capture, but as the months dragged on, the Valencia's search for answers seemed to reach a standstill. A whole year passed without any word, and it was beginning to feel as though the chapter of their daughter's disappearance might never close. But in February 2023, a breakthrough came. Authorities received information about a decomposed body found deep in the Chapultepec forest. The location was strikingly close to where Chieri had been last seen, and the police immediately suspected it was her. Without waiting for forensic confirmation, they informed Hikuri Valencia, Chieri's father, that they might have found his daughter. When the test results came back, it was confirmed the body found in the forest was indeed Chieri's. The news was a bittersweet revelation. While it brought a sense of closure to the Valencias, it also confirmed their worst fears, that their daughter would never return home. At least, though, they could finally lay her to rest. With the support of social activist Malia Sandoval and Congresswoman Yaritzi Flores, Chieri was given the dignified and respectful burial she deserved, surrounded by her grieving family and loved ones. Though nothing could erase the pain of losing her, the Valencias took solace in knowing that, after a long and painful journey, Chieri could now rest in peace, and her story would not be forgotten. It's deeply unsettling to think about the case of Chieri Valencia. Only the upper part of her torso was found, and we still don't know whether animals took the other parts or if they were scattered by someone else, possibly William Smith, though the details remain unclear. What we do know is that this traumatic event has left Hikuri struggling with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and hypertension. Despite this, he's made it clear that he won't stop searching for William Smith until he's found, no matter the cost. His determination to bring him to justice, even if it costs him his life, is a stark reminder of how deeply this case has affected him. To this day, William remains unconvicted, and it's hard to say if he's hiding out quietly or if he's continued to commit other crimes. There are so many unanswered questions, and we all hope that he's caught soon so justice can be served. As we look deeper into Chieri Valencia's case, one thing remains at the forefront of everyone's mind. What drove William Smith to commit such a horrific act? He had the means to pay a hefty $500 fee, so why would someone with financial stability go to such extreme lengths? Could this be the beginning of a serial killer's trail? These are all questions we hope to answer as the investigation continues. What do you think happened in this case? Was there something more to William Smith's actions that we don't know yet? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy this story and want to stay updated on the latest developments, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to turn on post notifications so you won't miss any of our shocking stories. Your thoughts could be key in uncovering this terrifying mystery. Let's continue to dig deeper together.